Today, we are going to hear the story of a billionaire who did not know how to flirt and was challenged to win over a librarian without using money. And he had no idea it was about to turn his life upside down. Get ready, stay with us until the end, and you will not regret it. Frank Cologne had never heard the word no in his life. At 32, he had already bought 3 enormous buildings, 2 luxury hotels, and a private island he did not even know how to find on a map. Important people answered his calls on the first ring. Doors opened before he even had to knock. And on that Tuesday morning, he was about to find out that all that power was absolutely useless. The door of the Silver Falls Public Library creaked when he pushed it open. Frank wrinkled his nose. The place smelled like old paper, wood, and something he could not identify, but that normal people would probably call nostalgia. He hated it instantly and made a face. "Sir, can I help you?" Frank turned toward the voice, and his brain stopped working. Behind the front desk stood the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. She was looking at him with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. She held a thick book against her chest like it was a shield. Frank swallowed hard. He had dated models, actresses, and heiresses, women who spent fortunes to look perfect. But that librarian, dressed simply and wearing very little makeup, left him staring at her like a fool. "Sir?" she repeated, now clearly impatient. "Are you looking for a specific book, or did you walk in here by mistake thinking this was a dealership for imported cars?" Frank blinked. "How do you know I drive imported cars?" "You are wearing a suit that probably costs more than this library's yearly budget. It is not hard to figure out." She turned her attention back to the computer in front of her, clearly dismissing him. Frank was not used to being dismissed. In fact, he was not even sure it had ever happened before. The feeling was strange, uncomfortable, but it made her more interesting. He walked up to the desk with the same confidence as a man who closed multi-million-dollar deals almost every day. "My name is Frank Cologne." "Hello," she replied without looking up. "Cologne, as in Cologne Enterprises." This time she looked at him. Her eyes narrowed. "And is that supposed to mean something to me?" Frank was speechless for a moment. Everyone knew Cologne Enterprises. It was one of the biggest real estate development companies in the country. "You really do not know who I am?" She went back to typing on the computer. "Nice to meet you, Melanie Carter. Now, unless you are checking out a book, I need to work." Frank smiled. That smile that made executives melt in board meetings and made waitresses drop trays. Melanie did not even blink. "Listen, Melanie," he said, leaning his elbow on the counter and trying to look casual. "Maybe we got off on the wrong foot. How about we start over? You know, I am a businessman, and you are clearly a woman of books. Maybe we could explore some kind of, how should I put it, romantic joint venture?" The silence that followed was so deep that Frank could hear his own heartbeat. Melanie tilted her head to the side, studying him as if he were a particularly confusing type of insect. "Did you just use corporate terminology to try to flirt with me?" Was it bad?" It was the most embarrassing pickup line I have heard in 12 years of working in this library. Frank felt his face grow hot, and he turned red like a ripe tomato. That was new too. He did not get embarrassed. He was usually the one embarrassing other people. "Look, I was just trying to flirt," Melanie finished for him. "Because if that was an attempt at flirting, I am genuinely worried about the women you have met so far. They need emotional support." Frank opened his mouth to reply, but he was interrupted by a voice he knew very well. "Franklin Theodore Cologne," he froze. That voice, that tone, that full use of his name, including the Theodore he worked so hard to hide. Slowly, like he was in a suspense movie, Frank turned around. Mrs. Elizabeth Cologne, 83 years of pure matriarchal authority, was standing at the entrance to the periodical section with her arms crossed and an expression that could make army generals resign. "Grandma? What are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing, but I already know the answer." She walked toward him with steps surprisingly firm for her age. "I sent you here to get to know the place, not to embarrass the employees with cheap pickup lines." "How much did you hear, Grandma?" "Honey, the acoustics in this building are excellent. I heard everything, starting from the part about the romantic joint venture." Elizabeth shook her head. "Honestly, I thought I had raised you better." Melanie, who had watched everything in silence, let out a laugh that she tried to disguise as a cough. It did not work. Elizabeth turned to her with a warm smile. "Melanie, dear, I apologize for my grandson. He was spoiled too much and taught too little." "Grandma!" "It is the truth, Franklin." She turned to Melanie again. "This library belongs to the Elizabeth Cologne Foundation for Education and Culture. I founded it 40 years ago." Frank felt the ground disappear beneath him and his eyes widened. "Wait, this place is yours?" "The foundation's, to be precise." Elizabeth looked at her grandson with an unreadable expression. "You did not even know where you were standing, did you?" You only told me to come see the town library. You did not say it was yours." "I wanted to see what you would do," she sighed. "And you tried to use business jargon to impress a woman. At your age, and you still have not learned anything about what really matters." Elizabeth took Frank by the arm and pulled him aside, stepping a few paces away from Melanie. "Come here," she whispered, her eyes shining in a way Frank knew well. It was the look of someone plotting something. "What is it?" "Listen carefully." Her voice was low, almost impossible to hear. "Do you want to prove that you are more than a spoiled rich boy?" "Grandma, what are you talking about?" "I am talking about a test." She squeezed his arm. "You are going to win that young woman over." Frank looked at Melanie, who had gone back to work, pretending they did not exist. "Win her over? What do you mean, win her over?" "The traditional way, by talking, being kind, showing who you really are underneath all that money and arrogance." "But I do not know how to do that." "That is exactly why you need to learn," Elizabeth smiled. "And there are rules. First, you cannot spend a single cent to impress her. No expensive restaurants, luxury gifts, or helicopter rides. But second, you cannot tell her about our arrangement. She has to like you for real, not out of pity or obligation." Frank swallowed hard. "And what if I cannot do it?" "Then, unfortunately, you will prove that I was right about what you have become. That you are just a handsome man in an expensive suit, but empty inside." The words hurt more than Frank expected. "I will prove to you, Grandma, that I am not that spoiled boy you think I am. How much time do I have?" 3 months, Elizabeth patted his face. "Oh, and honey, I am going to have all your credit cards canceled. From now on, you live on the salary of an average American." "What?" "Enjoy the experience. It will do you good." With that, Elizabeth walked toward Melanie, said goodbye with a gentle wave, and left through the front door as if she had not just turned her grandson's life upside down. Frank stood in the middle of the library, trying to process what had just happened. Melanie glanced sideways. Family problems? He turned to her, completely lost. My grandmother just challenged me to... He stopped, remembering that he could not tell her. Nothing. Grandmother stuff. Grandmother stuff that involves cutting off your credit cards? You heard that? It is not my fault. My hearing is good. Frank. I have no idea what to do now. Can I give you one free piece of advice? Please. Stop using corporate jargon. It is really very strange. She adjusted her glasses. And maybe try reading a good romance novel once in a while. Frank nodded slowly, still shaken. For the first time in his life, he was going to be without the many unlimited black cards his grandmother had given him. And the woman he was supposedly supposed to win over thought he was just another spoiled rich guy and the most embarrassing person she knew. As he watched Melanie go back to cataloging her books as if he did not exist, Frank became absolutely certain of one thing. The next 3 months were going to be a complete disaster. And for some inexplicable reason, a small part of him was almost excited about it. Later, Frank spent the entire night on the phone with his grandmother, not to beg her to give his credit cards back, not to negotiate the terms of that madness, but to ask for advice on how to win over a woman without money. That was his first mistake. You need to wink at her, Elizabeth said, with the confidence of someone who had lived 8 decades. A mysterious look followed by a charming wink. It worked in my day. Grandma, your day was during the Eisenhower administration. And Eisenhower was a very charming man. He winked all the time. Frank hung up the phone with the feeling that he was about to make a historic mistake. The next morning, he walked into the library with a plan. A terrible plan, based on advice from a woman who still thought floppy disks were cutting-edge technology, but a plan all the same. Melanie was in the same place as the day before, behind the front desk, organizing a stack of returned books. She looked up when she heard the door. Oh, you came back. Good morning to you too. Frank took a deep breath. Time to put the plan into action. He walked up to the desk with steps that were trying to look casual, but probably looked more like someone crossing a minefield. When he got there, he rested his elbow on the counter, tilted his head slightly to the side, and tried to do the charming wink his grandmother had described. What happened was something completely different. His right eye closed, then opened, then closed again, but this time his left eye twitched too without meaning to. The result was a series of facial spasms that looked more like a short circuit than flirting. Melanie stopped organizing the books. Are you okay? Frank kept blinking, thinking maybe he just needed more practice. I'm great. Why? Because it looks like you're having a seizure. It's a wink. That is not a wink. It looks like you're having a nervous breakdown. Should I call someone? A doctor? A priest? I'm not having any kind of breakdown. Then did you get sand in your eye? Because it looks like you got a generous handful of sand in your eye. In both eyes, actually. Frank finally stopped blinking, his face burning with embarrassment. It was supposed to be charming. Melanie let out a That was a lot of things, but charming is definitely not on the list. It was concerning and unsettling, but not even a little charming. She shook her head, still head. Frank felt something strange happen. For the second time in 2 days, he was being completely humiliated by that woman. And instead of getting angry, he was fascinated? Who taught taught you to do that?"
God.
she asked, wiping a tear of laughter from the corner of her eye. "My grandmother." "Your grandmother in her 80s taught you how to flirt?" "She said it worked in her day." "In her day, people also thought cigarettes were good for your health." Frank did not know what to say. Melanie went back to organizing the books, but he noticed she was still smiling. A small smile, almost impossible to notice. So, he tried again, completely giving up on the wink strategy. "I came to ask for a book." "A poetry book." Melanie stopped. She looked at him in surprise. "You want a poetry book?" "Yes." "You, the visionary entrepreneur, want to read poetry?" "Is that a problem?" "Not at all. It's just that you do not exactly look like the type who enjoys verses about the human condition." "Maybe you do not know me as well as you think." She stepped out from behind the desk and walked toward one of the shelves. Frank followed her, keeping a respectful distance. "What kind of poetry are you looking for?" she asked, running her fingers along the spines of the books. "Romantic, existential, contemporary?" Frank had no idea what any of those categories meant. "Which one do you recommend?" Melanie turned to face him, her arms crossed. "Why are you really here?" "I already told you. I want a poetry book." "No, you want something. To show me you like books? To try to impress me with something?" "That's not it." "Then what is it?" Frank opened his mouth to answer, but realized he could not tell the truth. His grandmother's condition was clear. Melanie could not know about the agreement. He hesitated. "I realized I do not know much about anything besides business, and you seem to know a lot of things. I thought maybe I could learn something." Melanie studied his face for a long moment. Frank felt like he was being examined by a human X-ray. "You're lying," she said at last. "But it's an interesting lie. Most men lie to seem better than they are. You are lying by admitting you do not know anything. It is almost honest in its dishonesty." "Was that a compliment?" "It was an observation." She pulled a book from the shelf and handed it to him. "Here, start with this one." Frank looked at the cover. It was a collection of classic American poems. "When then what?" "There is no then." Melanie went back to the desk. "Read that whole book, every page, every verse, every word, and when you finish, come back here and tell me which poem was your favorite and why." "And if I do that?" "Then maybe I will consider having a real conversation with you. One that does not involve winks that look like medical emergencies." Frank held the book with both hands, as if it were a valuable contract. "How much time do I have?" "As much time as you need. It is not a competition." "But what if I want to impress you?" "You will not impress me by reading fast. You will impress me by understanding what you read." She sat down in the chair behind the counter and went back to work, clearly ending the conversation. Frank stood there for a moment, holding that book, which was probably the first thing not related to business he had read in years. "Melanie?" "Hmm?" "Thank you." She did not look up, but he saw the corner of her mouth curve slightly. "Do not thank me yet. You have not even started." Frank left the library with the book under his arm and a strange feeling in his chest. It was almost like anxiety? No, it was something else. Something he had not felt since he was a child, and his mother used to challenge him to finish his homework before dinner. It was the desire to prove he was capable, What Frank did not know was that Melanie watched him leave through the library window, and when he disappeared from sight, she murmured to herself, "He seems a little awkward, but also interesting." Frank Cologne read the poetry book in 3 days. He did not understand almost any of it, but he read it. Every page, every verse, every incomprehensible word. And now he was back at the library, determined to prove he was a cultured and sophisticated man. "So, did you finish it already?" Melanie asked, surprised when he placed the book on the counter. "I finished it." "In 3 days?" "You told me to read everything. I read everything." She crossed her arms. "What was your favorite poem?" Frank had prepared for that question. He had even written the name down on a piece of paper that was now in his pocket. Number 47. Number 47. That one. The poems in this book are not numbered. Frank felt his face turn red. "I meant the one on page 47. Melanie picked up the book and opened it to the page he mentioned. "Frank, this page is an introduction about the author's life. There is no poem here." Frank did not know what to do or what to say. "You did not read the book, did you?" "I did. I just maybe skipped some parts. The boring parts, which were almost most of it." Melanie closed the book. "Unbelievable, Frank." "Listen, poetry is hard. The words do not make sense. Why would anyone write leaves of grass when they could just say grass?" "Because it is a metaphor." "A metaphor for what?" "For..." Melanie stopped, clearly trying not to laugh. "You really did not understand anything?" "I understood that poets really like to talk about nature and confusing feelings, sometimes both at the same time, just to make it harder for whoever is reading." This time, Melanie could not hold it back. A laugh escaped, quick and surprised. Frank felt that strange sensation again, the same one he felt when she laughed at his disastrous wink. "Look," he said, trying to recover some dignity. "I came here to prove I can be useful. Let me help with something." "Help?" "Yes, manual work, organizing, anything. Just not reading poetry books." Melanie studied him for a moment, as if deciding whether he was serious. "The history section needs to be reorganized. The books have been out of order since last week. You can start there if you want." "Perfect. History. I love history." "Frank, do you know anything about history?" "I know it happened in the past." Melanie let out a deep sigh. "The shelf is in the back. Try not to cause any international disasters." Frank walked to the history section with the confidence of a general heading into battle. The shelf was large, full of thick, heavy books about wars, presidents, and events he vaguely remembered seeing in movies. Organize in alphabetical order. This cannot be that hard. The problem was that Frank Cologne had never organized anything in his life. He had people to do that. People who organized his clothes, his files, his meetings, his entire life. But he was not about to admit that to Melanie. He started by taking books off the top shelf. The first one was surprisingly heavy. The second, even heavier. The third made his arms shake. "Are you okay back there?" Melanie's voice came from behind the counter. "Perfectly fine. This is very easy." He tried to put the books on the floor to reorganize them, but the movement made him lose his balance. Instinctively, he grabbed the shelf. The shelf shook. Frank froze. "No, no, no." The shelf shook again, this time harder. The books on the upper shelves started to fall. Frank tried to catch them, which only made things worse. He watched the entire shelf tilt toward him. Oh no. The impact was not painful. It was disastrous and humiliating. Frank Cologne, billionaire, owner of hotels and skyscrapers, was now lying on the floor of the Silver Falls Public Library, completely buried under history books. A particularly thick copy about the Civil War was over his face. Another one about the Great Depression rested on his chest. And a biography of Abraham Lincoln had fallen in a way that seemed to be pointing an accusing finger at him. Oh my God! Melanie's voice. She had run to the section and was now standing there, looking at the scene. Frank waited for the scolding, the lecture, being permanently thrown out of the library. She helped him stand up. But you are going to help me put all this back in order. Okay, I will help, since I am the one who knocked everything down. And this time, try not to destroy American historical heritage. Frank looked at the chaos around him. Books scattered everywhere, the shelf on the floor, his suit covered in dust. Melanie? Yes? This was the worst day of my life. And yet you are smiling. Frank realized that was true. He was smiling, and it was not the practice smile he used in business meetings. Yeah, I am. Melanie looked at him in a different way, not with irritation or suspicion, with something that looked like curiosity. You know, she said, picking up a book from the floor, maybe you are not completely hopeless. Was that a compliment? It was just an observation. They spent the next 2 hours reorganizing the history section together, and at some point, between the jokes about Frank's incompetence and the stories Melanie told about each book, something changed. Frank did not know exactly what, but when he finally left the library that night, he realized he had not thought about business even once while he was there with her. And in the pocket of his suit, there was a small piece of paper with Melanie's handwriting. 3 words that made his heart race all night. Page 73. Read carefully. Frank did not sleep that night. He sat on the bed in the modest apartment his grandmother had forced him to rent, staring at that piece of paper as if it were a treasure map. Page 73. What could be on page 73? At 3 a.m, he finally opened the poetry book, and he found a poem about waiting for something you did not know you needed. Frank read it 5 times. On the 6th, he understood. On the 7th, his heart was beating faster in a way he could not control. The next morning, he showed up at the library before Melanie had even opened the doors. "How long have you been here?" she asked, finding him sitting on the front steps. "A little while." "You look like you did not sleep." "I did not sleep at all." "Because of a poem?" Frank stood up, brushing the dust off his pants. "It was a good poem." Melanie tried to hide her smile, but she could not quite manage it. "Come on in. You look like you need coffee." While she was making coffee in the small staff break room, Frank had an idea. An idea that had seemed brilliant at 4 a.m, but now, in daylight, seemed potentially disastrous. He was going to leave her a note. The problem was that Frank did not know how to write notes with romantic words. He knew how to write contracts, corporate memorandums, and threatening emails to lawyers. But notes? That was unfamiliar territory. He sat down at one of the reading tables with a piece of paper and a borrowed pen. First attempt. "Melanie, you are beautiful." Too direct. It sounded like a robot. Second attempt. "Your eyes are like 2 bright stars in the night sky." Too cheesy. It sounded like an ad for cheap perfume. Third attempt. Did you know that the real estate market in Silver Falls grew 12% in the last quarter? It was not romantic at all, but at least it was an interesting fact. Frank looked at the paper. Maybe he could combine the two things? Fourth attempt. Did you know Silver Falls real estate market grew 12% last quarter? Your smile is probably responsible for at least 3% of that. That was strange, very strange, but it was honest. He folded the paper, hid it inside the poetry book he was returning, and placed it on the return pile when Melanie was not looking. 2 hours later, Frank was pretending to read a gardening magazine when he heard a laugh coming from the front desk. Melanie had found the note. She looked in his direction, shaking her head with an expression that mixed disbelief and amusement. Frank pretended to be deeply interested in an article about how to grow organic tomatoes. The next day, when he checked out the same poetry book again, there was a new folded paper on page 73. 12% is impressive, but my smile charges royalties. The rate is 1 compliment a day. You are behind. Frank laughed to himself in the middle of the library. An elderly woman looked at him like he was crazy. That was how the note exchange began. Every time Frank returned a book, he left a paper hidden between the pages. And every time he checked out a book, he found a reply. Frank's notes were a chaotic mix of facts about economics, comments about the weather, and compliments that sounded like they had been written by an alien trying to understand human emotions. In one of the notes, Frank wrote, "I read that smiling uses fewer muscles than frowning. You must have the most rested facial muscles in town." Melanie's replies were just as unusual, but filled with a kind of humor that made Frank keep every paper as if it were a valuable document. My facial muscles send their thanks for your concern. They also want to say you should try smiling more. It looks like you have a serious muscle debt. After 2 weeks of exchanging notes, the facts about economics started giving way to more personal questions. What is your favorite book? The real one, not the one you say to sound smart. The answer came the next day. A children's book about a girl who wanted to be an astronaut. My mother read it to me every night. I have never told anyone that. Now you know more about me than most people do. Frank stared at that paper for a long time. He replied, My father never read anything to me. He thought books were a waste of time. Maybe that is why I spent my whole life thinking the same thing. Until now. Melanie's answer was short, but it did something strange to Frank's heart. It is never too late to change your mind. About books, about everything. The notes continued, each one more personal, more intimate. It was as if the paper allowed them to say things they could never say out loud. Frank learned that Melanie dreamed of traveling to Ireland, that she was afraid of storms, that she laughed alone while watching old comedies. Melanie learned that Frank had not spoken to his father in 5 years, that he was terrified of failure, that sometimes he woke up in the middle of the night without knowing who he really was underneath all that money. And then, on a rainy afternoon, Frank found a different kind of note. It was not hidden in a book. It was on the counter, waiting for him, with his name written on the outside. He opened it with trembling hands. Stop hiding behind paper. Tomorrow, 7 o'clock. Meet me at the back exit. No notes. Just us. Frank read it 3 times to make sure he understood. Melanie wanted to see him. For real. Without the protection of books and written words. He looked toward the counter. Melanie was helping someone else, but her eyes met his for a second. And in that second, Frank realized something terrifying. He was not pretending anymore. Somewhere between the notes and the laughter, between the poems and the confessions, something real had started between them. And now he would have to decide whether to tell the truth about the arrangement with his grandmother, or keep living a lie with the only person who made him feel something real. Frank Cologne arrived behind the library at 6:45. He checked his watch, checked his hair in the reflection of the window, checked his pocket to make sure he still had money. $23. That was all his grandmother allowed him to have each week. At exactly 7 o'clock, the back door opened. Melanie stepped out, taking off her employee badge and slipping it into her bag. "You are punctual. That is annoyingly impressive." "Thank you for the compliment." "That was not a compliment. Punctual people make me nervous. They always look like they are planning something." "I was planning to arrive on time." "Suspicious." She smiled. "So, what did you plan for this mysterious evening with no notes?" Frank took a deep breath. This was the moment. "I thought I would take you to dinner." "Dinner?" "Yes, I know an amazing place with authentic urban cuisine." Melanie crossed her arms. "Authentic urban cuisine?" "It is a technical term." "You just made that up." "Completely. But the place is good, I promise." They walked 3 blocks to Joe's Diner, a place that promised the best food for the lowest price in Silver Falls. The neon sign blinked unevenly, and the poster in the window showed a burger that cost $4.99. Melanie stopped in front of it. "Here?" "Here. You, Frank Cologne, want to eat at Joe's Diner? Is there a problem?" "None at all. It is just that I thought you would want to go somewhere where the menu does not have prices and the waiter speaks French. That seems much more like you." I wanted to do something different. The truth was that Frank did not have a choice because he was short on money. But he was not going to admit that. They went in and sat at a table near the window. "Charming," Melanie commented, looking around. "Rustic," Frank corrected. "The proper term is rustic." A waitress appeared beside the table, chewing gum. "What can I get you?" Frank opened the menu with the confidence of someone who went to places like that all the time. "2 special burgers, please." "Want fries?" "Yes." "Soda?" "Please." "Refills are free." Frank blinked. "What do you mean, refills?" "Refills, for soda. They are free. You can fill your cup as many times as you want," said the waitress. "As many times as I want?" The waitress looked at him as if he had asked whether the sun rose in the east. "Yes, that is how it works everywhere." "Is that allowed by law?" Melanie covered her mouth with her hand, trying to hold back her laughter. "This is a diner, sir." The waitress rolled her eyes. "I will be back in a few minutes with your order." She walked away, leaving Frank in complete shock. "You have never had a soda refill in your life?" Melanie asked, no longer able to hold back her laughter. "I did not even know that existed." "How did you not know? It is the most normal thing in the world." "The places I used to go charged $15 for a glass of imported sparkling water." "My God, imported sparkling water," Melanie said, laughing out loud. "Yes, from France, and it even had special bubbles." Melanie wiped away a tear. Frank, you lived in a bubble. Literally. The worst part is that I am only realizing that now. He smiled. The food arrived a few minutes later. 2 huge burgers, piles of fries, and cups of soda that Frank now knew could be refilled as many times as he wanted while paying only once. He stared at the burger as if it were a puzzle. Is something wrong? Melanie asked, already taking a bite of hers. I just do not know where to start. Wow, have you really never eaten burgers before? You pick it up and bite. That is it. But what about the filling? It is coming out the sides. That is part of the experience, and it makes the burger better. Frank picked up the burger awkwardly. Ketchup ran down his wrist. A slice of tomato slipped out and fell onto the table. Lettuce spread across the plate. This is much more complicated than it looks, he said, with sauce on his chin. You look like a baby learning how to eat on his own. Thank you for the moral support. Melanie handed him a napkin, laughing. Frank wiped his face, feeling embarrassed but strangely light. Can I ask you a question? She said, suddenly serious. Of course. Why are you doing this? Eating a burger? No, all of this. The library, the notes. She tilted her head. What do you really want, Frank? The question caught him off guard. The honest answer was complicated. It involved his grandmother and the arrangement he could not mention. But there was another answer, one he only realized was true the moment he said it. I want to know what it feels like to be normal. Normal? To have a $7 dinner with someone and think it is amazing. To read a poem and feel something. To knock over a bookshelf and laugh instead of suing someone. He looked at her. My whole life has been about numbers and contracts. I do not know how to do anything else. Melanie stayed silent for a moment. What was your childhood like? She asked. Empty. The word came out before he could think before answering. My parents were always traveling. I had nannies, tutors, drivers, people who were paid to be around me. And your grandmother? She was different. She sent me letters every week with terrible drawings of cats. She cannot draw, but she never gave up. She was always more present. Melanie smiled. That is adorable. That is why I put up with her crazy ideas. What kind of crazy ideas? Frank almost told her. The words were right on the tip of his tongue, but he swallowed them back. Grandma stuff, he dodged. What about you? What was it like growing up in Silver Falls? Normal and simple. My mother was a teacher. My father was a mechanic. We did not have much, but we had enough. And the library? It was my favorite place. My mother took me every Saturday. We would spend hours choosing books together. It was our sacred ritual. Does she still do that? Melanie's silence was answer enough. She passed away, she said softly. 6 years ago. That is why I wanted to work at the library, to keep the ritual alive. Frank did not know what to say. In business, there was always a right answer. There, in front of her pain, he felt lost and speechless. I'm sorry, was all he could manage to say. Thank you. She gave him a sad smile. Now you know something real about me. And you know something real about me. That you do not know how to eat a hamburger? That too. They laughed together, and everything felt lighter between them. When the bill came, Frank paid with his $20 bill, $19.42. There was less than $1 left for a tip, but it was all he had. Thank you for dinner, Melanie said on the way out. It was the strangest date of my life. Strange in a good way or a bad way? Strange in a different way. She looked at him. You are different from what I imagined, Frank Cologne. Is that good? I am still deciding. She started to walk away, but then stopped and turned back. Frank? Yes? Next week, there is an event at the library. Community Reading Night. I need someone to help me organize it. Are you inviting me? I am ordering you. Bring clothes you can get dirty, and try not to destroy any historic property this time. Frank stood there on the sidewalk, watching her walk away, but with his heart beating harder and the feeling that he was really falling in love. What he did not know was that he had left his document folder in the library office days earlier, and inside it, there were secrets he would now rather forget. The folder had been under the office desk for 9 days. Frank had completely forgotten about it, but the next morning, Frank arrived early at the library to help with the preparations. Melanie was arranging chairs in the main hall while he was given the task of organizing the back office. Why do I get the hidden work? He asked. Because you have a history of destroying things in public. I am trying to keep you from embarrassing yourself and protecting the library. But that only happened once. Once was enough to make history and create the biggest mess. Mrs. Patricia still tells everyone about the day the man in the suit knocked over the history shelf. She exaggerates too much. She says the floor even shook. The floor did not shake. I did feel a little vibration, Melanie said with a smile. Frank rolled his eyes, but he was smiling too when he walked into the office. The place was small, full of papers, files, and empty coffee cups that looked like they had been forgotten there since the previous administration. Frank started organizing the piles, feeling strangely happy to help. Meanwhile, Melanie finished arranging the chairs and went to the small break room to make coffee. The coffee was ready, and she decided to bring a cup to Frank, a peace offering, or maybe something more. When she walked into the office, she found him with his back to her, organizing a shelf. I brought coffee, she said. You are an angel, Melanie, Frank said with a smile. Do not exaggerate. It is machine coffee. It probably tastes like watered-down coffee. Frank laughed and turned to take the cup. At that moment, Melanie noticed something on the floor, under the desk. A leather folder. Is this yours? She asked, bending down to pick it up. Frank looked. His heart started pounding. Wait, you do not need to pick that up. But it was too late. Melanie had already picked up the folder and opened it. And inside was the complete architectural project for the Silver Falls Casino, including pools, luxury restaurants, and a note in the corner that said, Proposed location, public library property. Frank stood in silence, looking at Melanie. What is this? Melanie asked in a very serious tone. Melanie, I can explain everything. Then explain it right now. What is this, Frank? These are old plans, from before I met you. Plans to build a casino, in the place of the library. Yes, but in the place of the library that matters most in my life. She threw the folder onto the table angrily. All this time, she said, her voice trembling. The notes, the dinner, the conversations. What was all of this for, Frank? To distract me while you were planning to tear this place down? No, Melanie, it is not like that. So how does this work? She crossed her arms, her eyes shining with anger. Explain it to me, Frank. Explain how you show up out of nowhere, pretend you do not know how to flirt, pretend to be awkward and charming, and all this time you had plans to turn the place I love into a casino. Those plans were from before. I changed. I do not want to do that anymore. Changed? She let out an angry laugh. You are a billionaire, Frank. And people like you do not change. They just find easier ways to get what they want. Melanie, it is not fair for you to say that about me. You have seen how much I have changed since we met. You know what is not fair? Me believing you. I told you things about my life, real things, about my mother, about why this place is so important to me. Melanie, I understand your anger, but I am sorry. No, Frank, you will never understand what I feel for this library and what I am feeling right now. Frank took a step toward her, but Melanie stepped back. Do not come near me. Melanie, please, let me explain everything that happened. Explain what? That all of this was your strategy? That getting close to me was part of a business plan? She grabbed a book from the shelf beside her. Do you know what the difference is between you and this book, Frank? Melanie, please. The book is honest about what it is. You are not. She threw the book at him. Frank barely dodged it. Hey, are you crazy? Another book flew in his direction, then another. Melanie, stop this! Get out of my library, now, Melanie said, throwing another book at Frank. Technically, it belongs to my grandmother. Melanie stopped, holding a thick book in her hands. My grandmother, she repeated slowly. Of course. The same grandmother who showed up here on the first day, who put on that whole little act. The two of you planned this together, did you not? It was not like that. Get out of here now, Frank! The book about the Industrial Revolution hit Frank on the shoulder. Ow, that hurt, okay? It is supposed to hurt. Get out now! Melanie, please, stop this. Let us talk like adults. Another book flew past Frank's ear. Okay, I am leaving. But when you calm down, we will talk. Frank rushed out of the office and stopped at the front door of the library, his shoulder hurting from the books hitting him, but his heart hurt much more. He had ruined everything, and now he did not know what to do. Inside the library, Melanie leaned against the office door, breathing hard. And then she started to cry. She looked at the folder on the floor, at the architectural drawings of the casino that would be built in the place of the library. And then she did something impulsive. She picked up the phone and called the only person who could explain what was happening. Hello? The voice was Elizabeth Cologne's. Mrs. Cologne, we need to talk about your grandson and about what is really happening here, Melanie said, trying to control her crying. And the other end of the line, Elizabeth. Dear, you can come to my house. It is time for you to know the whole truth, Elizabeth said. I am coming, ma'am. We really do have a lot to talk about. Elizabeth Cologne's mansion stood at the top of the highest hill in Silver Falls, an old house full of history that the family had owned for generations. Frank had grown up running through those hallways, but he had never felt as small as he did at that moment, climbing the steps to the front entrance of the mansion. Before he could go in, the door opened. It was Margaret, the 60-year-old housekeeper who had worked for Elizabeth since before Frank was born. Mr. Frank, she is already here, Margaret said. Who? The librarian. She arrived 20 minutes ago. Your grandmother is serving tea. Frank felt a chill in his stomach. He went inside and found the two women sitting on the back porch. Elizabeth was holding a porcelain cup as if she were in a commercial for elegance. Melanie was holding hers as if she wanted to throw it at someone's head, probably his. Ah, Franklin, I am so glad you came. We were just talking about you. I can imagine that, Grandma. Sit down. Margaret, bring another cup for my grandson. I do not need tea. Everyone needs tea in difficult moments, dear. It is rule number 1 of civilized life. Frank sat down, keeping a safe distance from Melanie. She did not even look at him. So, Elizabeth began, setting her cup on the table. It seems we have a small misunderstanding to clear up. Misunderstanding? Melanie finally spoke. Do you think this is a misunderstanding? Dear, I understand that you are upset. Upset is not enough. I found out I was being used as a piece in some rich family game. Upset does not even begin to describe what I am feeling right now. Frank opened his mouth to speak, but Elizabeth raised her hand. Let me explain, Franklin. You will only make things worse. Thank you for the confidence, Grandma. I've known you for 32 years. Trust is based on evidence. Elizabeth turned to Melanie, her expression softening. Melanie, dear, I owe you an explanation and an apology. I'm listening, ma'am. When my grandson showed up wanting to buy the library's land, I was furious. Not because of the land, but because I saw that he had become exactly the kind of person I had spent my whole life trying to keep him from becoming. And what kind is that? The kind who thinks money solves everything. The kind who has never had to truly earn anything. Elizabeth looked at Frank. I spoiled him too much when he was a child. His parents were never around, so I tried to make up for it with gifts. I thought I was helping. What I was really doing was creating a man without a heart. Grandma, Frank protested. Am I lying, dear? Frank thought for a moment. Maybe not. The test I created, Elizabeth continued, was not meant to humiliate my grandson or you, Melanie. It was meant to teach him something no elite university or business school could ever teach. And what would that be? Melanie asked. That the most valuable things in life cannot be bought. That real human connection requires vulnerability, not money. That being truly loved is completely different from being admired for a bank account. Frank and Melanie stayed silent for a few moments. And what was I in all of this? Melanie asked quietly. Your experiment? No, dear. You were the teacher. Elizabeth smiled. I watched you for years in that library. I saw how you treat people, how you protect that place. You are exactly the kind of person I admire, and the kind who could teach my grandson what really matters in life. So you used me. I created an opportunity. What happened inside it was completely real. Frank finally managed to speak. Melanie, I know you have no reason to believe me, but those casino plans were from before I met you, before everything. And now? Now I do not want the casino anymore. I do not want the land. I do not want any of it. How convenient, Frank. It is not convenient. It is the truth. Melanie finally looked at him. Her eyes were still full of hurt. How am I supposed to know this is not just another one of your lies? Before Frank could answer, Elizabeth's phone rang. She looked at the screen and frowned. It is the company office. Excuse me, I need to take this. She stood up and stepped off the porch, leaving Frank and Melanie alone. "I ruined everything," Frank finally said. "Yes, you did. I should have told you about the deal, about all of it." "You really should have, Frank, but that is not what you did." "But what I felt was real. It is real." Melanie did not answer. She kept looking at the garden. "Do you remember the poem on page 73? Frank asked. "What?" "The poem you told me to read, about waiting for something you did not know you needed." "I remember. I read that poem about 50 times, and every time I thought about you." "Frank, I know that does not fix anything. I know words are not enough. But I want you to know that, for the first time in my life, I found something I cannot buy. And it terrifies me." Melanie opened her mouth to answer, but Elizabeth came rushing back onto the porch. Her face was pale. "Franklin, we have a problem." "What is it?" "The shareholders. They called an emergency meeting. They want to approve the casino construction today." "Today? But they cannot do that without my approval." "Apparently they can. You signed a power of attorney 6 months ago giving the board authority over urban development decisions." Frank felt the ground disappear beneath him. "I do not remember signing that." "You sign everything they put in front of you, dear. I always warned you that would cause trouble someday." "How much time do I have?" Elizabeth looked at her watch. "The meeting starts in an hour." Frank stood up quickly. "I need to go." He looked at Melanie, who remained seated, still trying to process everything. "Melanie, I know you do not trust me, but I am going to prove that I've changed, even if it is the last thing I do." He ran off before she could answer. Melanie stayed on the porch, looking at the garden. "Will he make it?" she asked Elizabeth. Elizabeth sighed. "Honestly, I do not know. Those shareholders are like sharks, and my grandson is about to swim with them with no protection at all." Melanie set her cup on the table and stood up. "Where's this meeting?" Elizabeth smiled. "The meeting is at Colon Enterprises headquarters. Boardroom, 12th floor." Melanie picked up her purse. "Then we should go, ma'am." Elizabeth raised an eyebrow. "We?" "Yes. If those men want to decide the future of the library, they're going to have to hear me first." "Now we are finally speaking the same language," Elizabeth said with a smile. 40 minutes later, Elizabeth and Melanie arrived at the company. But upstairs, on the 12th floor, Frank was already walking into the boardroom. The room was enormous, with a long table, and 10 men in suits were sitting around it. Some were using tablets, others were flipping through reports. They all looked extremely calm, like sharks waiting for prey. Clayton Wells was sitting at the head of the table. When he saw Frank walk in, he gave him a smile that was anything but friendly. "Ah, finally. We were starting to think you would not come." Frank walked to the table. "This meeting cannot happen without me." "Actually, it can." He slid a document across the table. "This is the power of attorney signed by you. The one where you authorize the board to approve urban development projects." Frank was furious, but tried to stay in control. "That document was signed before there was any discussion about this casino." Clayton folded his hands. "Even so, it is still valid." Another shareholder spoke up. "Let's be practical, Frank. The casino will generate millions for this company, and it is already time for us to decide. We do not need to wait any longer." And it will also create a lot of jobs and bring in tourism. Frank took a deep breath and asked, "And the library?" "That library is just an old building full of books. It can be moved to a smaller space," another man replied. Clayton added, "Or demolished. That would be much easier." At that moment, Frank felt something different growing inside him. It was not ordinary anger. It was outrage. "Clayton, that library is not just a building," Frank said. Clayton laughed. "Of course it is. It is just bricks and old paper." "No." Frank slammed his hand on the table. "That is where children learn to read, where people find refuge, where stories live." Some of the shareholders exchanged bored looks. "Sentiment does not pay dividends." "Profit does," Douglas said. Clayton then pressed a button beside the table. A slide appeared on the projector screen. It was a huge modern casino with pools, restaurants, and bright lights. "This project can generate $50 million in 5 years." He looked directly at Frank. "The question is simple." He smiled. "Frank, are you going to choose books or money?" Frank opened his mouth to answer, but at that moment, the door to the room opened. Everyone looked. Melanie walked in, and Elizabeth came in behind her. Everyone fell silent. Then Clayton asked, "And who is this old woman?" Elizabeth walked to the table. "Gentlemen, I am Elizabeth Colin. I know some of you do not know me because I have always left everything in my grandson's hands. But now I am here. It is a pleasure to meet all of you." Some of the shareholders swallowed hard. Clayton did too. She pointed at Melanie. "And this young woman is the person you are about to harm." Douglas tried to regain control. "Mrs. Colin, this is a private corporate meeting." Melanie stepped forward. "Then why are you discussing destroying something that belongs to the whole city?" Clayton. "Oh, so this is the librarian." "Miss, this is not about feelings. This is about business." Melanie looked directly at him. "Business without conscience is just greed." A murmur moved across the room. Clayton rolled his eyes. "What a beautiful speech." "It is not a speech. It is the truth," she replied. She pointed to the casino image on the screen. "You see money." Then she turned to Frank. "But he finally started seeing people." Everyone looked at Frank. Clayton spoke coldly. "Frank, are you letting a librarian make decisions for the company now?" Frank was silent for a moment. Then he answered calmly. "No." He straightened his shoulders. "I am the one making the decision." Clayton stared at him. "And what is your decision?" Frank pushed the approval document to the center of the table. "The casino will not be built." Clayton stood up angrily and shouted, "You cannot make that decision by yourself!" That was when Elizabeth spoke. "Actually, he can." She placed a document on the table proving that she still owned 51% of the shares. "Clayton, this board only has power as long as the heir does not show maturity," Elizabeth said firmly. "I kept my 51% of the shares under a safeguard clause, waiting for the day my grandson would understand that business without conscience is only greed. The speech my grandson just gave proves that he is ready to lead with heart, not just greed. I am activating my majority voting power now. I vote with my grandson not to build the casino, and the library stays." Frank looked at Melanie, and for the first time since she found out the truth, she at him. And that was how they won the battle against the shareholders. The sharks in suits backed down with their tails between their legs. But for Frank to win Melanie's trust again, it would be much more complicated. A week had passed since the meeting. Frank called the library every day. Melanie did not answer a single time. He sent flowers. She returned every one of them. He sent chocolates. Those were returned too. He sent a 12-page apology letter. That came back with a single word written in red. No. He needed a different strategy with Melanie, but he did not know how, so he had a crazy idea that maybe could work. One morning, Frank showed up at the library with a resume in his hand. "What is that?" Melanie asked, looking at the paper as if it were something contagious. "My resume. I am applying for the volunteer intern position." "We do not have a volunteer intern position." "The sign on the door says you always need volunteers." "That sign has been there for 15 years. No one takes it seriously." "I do." Melanie crossed her arms. "You want to work here, for free, doing exactly what?" "Anything you tell me to do." "Anything I tell you?" "Yes, it can be anything." A dangerous smile appeared on Melanie's face, the kind of smile that should about Frank leave. "Are you sure?" "Yes, I will do anything you ask," Frank said, a little afraid of what somehow should going to ask for. "The men's bathroom needs a deep cleaning." Frank swallowed hard. "Let us not go too far," Frank said, shocked by her request. "Frank, you said anything. So are you going to do it or not?" "Fine. I will cleaning it. Since word's everything, then I will keep my word." 30 minutes later, Frank Cologne was on his knees on the floor of the library bathroom, wearing yellow rubber gloves and holding a worn-out brush. His Italian suit was protected by an apron that said, "I love books," in colorful letters. Mrs. Patricia walked by the door and stopped. "Is that not the young man who knocked over the bookshelf?" "It is him." Melanie's voice came from the hallway. "And now he is cleaning the bathroom?" "He volunteered." "Volunteered, poor thing." "These are strange times, Mrs. Patricia." The elderly woman looked at Frank with a mix of confusion and satisfaction. "You missed a little spot there in the corner, dear." Frank looked where she was pointing. "Thank you." "You are welcome. It is nice to see young people working." She left, and Frank could swear he heard her laughing down the hallway. After the bathroom came the storage room. Dusty boxes full of old books that needed to be cataloged. Frank sneezed so many times that he lost count. "Are you okay in there?" Melanie appeared in the doorway. "Achoo! Perfectly fine. Achoo!" he answered between sneezes. "I am just having an allergic reaction to the consequences of my own choices." Melanie almost smiled. "When you finish here, there is a reading session for children at 2. We need someone to read." "Read to children?" "You do know how to read, do you not?" "I know how to read corporate merger contracts." "This is going to be very different." At 2 o'clock, Frank was sitting in a tiny chair, surrounded by 15 children between 4 and 7 years old, holding a picture book about a bear who wanted to make friends. Frank kept reading, but one of the children decided it would be a good idea to show him a drawing. The drawing was covered in red and blue paint, still wet. "Your drawing is very beautiful," Frank said, holding the paper. "It is you, mister," the child said happily. Frank looked at the drawing. It was a stick figure with a huge head and something that looked like a purple suit. "I am flattered," Frank said, smiling. The child hugged his leg in gratitude, transferring an impressive amount of paint onto his suit pants. Frank looked down. His $3,000 suit now had stains in the shape of little children's hands. He should have been annoyed. He should have been furious. But instead, he laughed. When the session ended, Frank was covered in paint, glitter, and something he hoped was glue. His hair had little pieces of colored paper stuck in it. His suit looked like a piece of abstract art. Melanie found him outside the children's room. "My God, what happened to you?" "Art," Frank answered. "A lot of art happened to me." She looked him up and down, at the stained suit, at the hair full of paper, at the paint marks on his face. And then she did something Frank did not expect. She laughed. Not a simple laugh, a real, full laugh. "You look like a clown who fought with a bucket of paint," she managed to say between laughs. "See? Children are more dangerous than they look." "You let them paint on you?" "I did not let them, but they did it anyway." Melanie wiped away tears of laughter. "Why are you doing this, Frank? Really?" He looked at her, serious despite his disastrous appearance. "Because I want you to know that I changed. Not just with words, but with actions. And if that means cleaning bathrooms and being attacked by children with paint, then that is exactly what I am going to do." "Until when?" "Until you believe me." Melanie stayed silent for a moment. She walked away, and Frank remained standing in the hallway, covered in paint and glitter, feeling more hopeful than he had in weeks. 3 weeks after Frank showed up with that resume in his hand, things at the library had changed. He still came in every morning. He still did whatever Melanie told him to do. And she still pretended that none of it was slowly melting her heart. Until one afternoon, while Frank was trying to put a book in the wrong place for the 4th time in a row, he looked at her and said, with that serious executive expression on his face, "Melanie, have you ever seen Letters to Her?" Melanie stopped typing. "It is my favorite movie. Why are you asking?" "Because it is playing at the theater tonight, and I bought 2 tickets." He pulled the tickets out of his suit pocket as if he were presenting a corporate merger proposal. Melanie looked at the tickets, then at him, then at the tickets again. "You looked up my favorite movie?" "Maybe." "Frank Cologne, did you stalk me?" "I prefer to call it market research." She crossed her arms to hide the smile that kept trying to appear at the corner of her mouth. "Fine, but you are paying for the popcorn." "I can buy the whole theater if you want." "Just the popcorn is enough, Frank, and it has to have butter. And a soda." Frank gave her a huge smile, the kind of smile his grandmother said he used to have as a child when he got a Christmas present. At the theater, he had tried to reserve the entire VIP room, of course, but Melanie insisted on sitting in the regular showing, in the middle of everyone else, with the plastic seats that squeaked every time someone moved. Frank made the seat squeak 3 times just trying to get comfortable, which made the whole row turn and look at him. "Stop moving," Melanie whispered. Was this seat designed to torture people? It was designed for normal people who stay still during the movie. I am staying still. You are moving the whole time and making the seat squeak. The seat is squeaking, not me. She sighed, grabbed a handful of popcorn, and turned her attention back to the movie. About 20 minutes later, without thinking, she reached into the popcorn bucket at the same time he did. Their hands touched inside it. They both stopped at the same time. Frank looked at her. She looked at the screen, pretending nothing had happened. But her cheeks were red, and the movie had not even reached the emotional part yet. He smiled quietly and said nothing. He simply left his hand there, next to hers, inside the popcorn bucket. She did not pull her hand away. They were the best 90 minutes of Frank Cologne's life, and he barely paid attention to the movie. After the theater, they went to the amusement fair set up in Silver Falls's Central Square. It was one of those weekend fairs with hot dog stands, colorful lights flashing in every direction, and loud music coming from all sides at once. Melanie stopped in front of the Ferris wheel and stared at it with bright eyes, like a child the night before a birthday. "Want to go?" she asked. Frank looked at the Ferris wheel, at the height, at the gondolas swaying up high as if they were made of paper. "Let's go," he said, with the steady voice of someone who was absolutely not afraid of anything in this life. 3 minutes later, at the very top, Frank was gripping the metal bar so hard that his fingers had turned white. The gondola swayed slightly in the wind, and he closed his eyes for 2 seconds. "Are you okay?" Melanie asked. "I am perfectly fine." "You are pale." "It is the reflection of the lights." "Frank, stop being scared." The gondola barely moved. "I am not scared. I am just enjoying the view. It is very beautiful up here." She looked at him. Then she looked at the city below. Then she looked back at him, who was very clearly trying not to look down. She let out a soft little laugh and, without thinking too much about it, rested her head on his shoulder. Frank felt his heart race like a Formula One car. "Thank you for looking up my favorite movie," she said very softly. "Thank you for coming with me," he answered, his voice softer than he meant it to be. Up there, with the tiny city below them and the wind messing up both their hair, neither of them said anything else. They did not need to. Sometimes the silence between two people says exactly what words cannot. The following week, Frank arrived at the library with a different expression, more serious, the way he looked when he was about to close an important deal. Melanie looked at that face and got worried, because the last time he had shown up like that, half her life had changed. "I have something to show you," he said. He led her to the front entrance of the library and pointed to a huge sign taped to the door. Melanie read it slowly. "Renovation in progress. Reopening in 30 days. In partnership with Colon Enterprises." She stood there staring at the sign without saying anything. "You renovated the library?" "I am renovating it. New books, a digital system, air conditioning that actually works, bathrooms that do not need brave volunteers to clean them." "Frank, let me finish." He pulled an envelope out of his suit pocket. "There is something else." She opened the envelope slowly. It was an official letter with the Colon Enterprises letterhead. She read it out loud, almost unable to believe it. "Dear Melanie Carter, it is with great pleasure that we inform you of your appointment as Chief Administrator of the Silver Falls Public Library." Melanie looked at the paper and looked at him. "You are giving me the job I have already been doing for free for 5 years?" "Now with a salary, and an official title, and a budget to buy new books every month." Her eyes filled with tears. She blinked quickly, trying to hide them, but it did not help much. "Why are you doing all this?" Frank took a step toward her. He ran a hand through his hair, completely awkward in a way that did not match a billionaire who was used to telling everyone what to do. Because you deserve it. And because I like you very much, Melanie Carter. More than anything I have ever bought in my life. Then, very softly, she said, "You are terrible at flirting, Frank." "I know. But did it work this time?" What happened next was simple, and at the same time, the most important moment of Frank Colin's life. She stood on her tiptoes. He lowered his head, and their kiss happened right there, on the sidewalk in front of the library. It was not a movie kiss. There was no dramatic music playing in the background. Mrs. Patricia happened to walk by at that exact moment with her shopping cart and shouted, "This should have happened a long time ago!" They pulled apart, and Melanie's face was completely red, and Frank had a goofy smile he could not get rid of no matter what. When Frank told his grandmother, Elizabeth Colin threw both arms into the air as if she had just won the lottery. "I knew it! I told you the wink would work in the end." "The wink did not work, Grandma. I cleaned the library bathroom." They are both equally valid strategies for winning someone over. One is romance. The other is humiliating manual labor. "Frank, dear." Elizabeth took her grandson's face in both hands and squeezed gently, the way she had done since he was 6 years old. "Love is exactly that. Humiliating manual labor." Frank blinked. That was surprisingly wise. "I am 83 years old. Everything I say is wise. Write that down." 2 days later, Elizabeth showed up at the library without warning, carrying a huge basket full of homemade cookies and the energy of someone about to do something important. She found Melanie organizing the new shelves that were being installed and set the basket right on the counter with the authority of a queen. "I brought grandmother cookies. The chocolate ones are for you. The vanilla ones too. Do not let him take any." Melanie, "Mrs. Elizabeth, Frank is going to want—" "My grandson was spoiled all his life. Now it is your turn to be spoiled." She picked up a cookie and took a bite. "So, when are you two going to make this official already?" Melanie choked. "We are still getting to know each other." "Child, he renovated an entire library for you. That is the modern version of a marriage proposal." "It is a dating proposal." "Then accept it quickly before I die of anxiety waiting. You young people are so slow." That same night, when Frank came to pick Melanie up for dinner, she opened the door with shining eyes in a way he still did not fully know yet, but already thought was far too beautiful. "Your grandmother said she is dying of anxiety," she said. Frank closed his eyes slowly. "She said that to you?" "She said that and about 10 other things I would rather not repeat." He took a deep breath, looked at her, and decided there was no point in dragging this out anymore. "Melanie Carter, will you be my girlfriend? No corporate script, no popcorn as an excuse, no library volunteering. Just you and me." She pretended to think for a few seconds, which was enough time for Frank to age 2 full years. "Only if you agree that I choose the movies." "I agree." "And that the popcorn is always large and buttery." "I agree." "And that your grandmother is going to bother us forever." Frank sighed. "Well, that I cannot promise anymore. She is going to do that no matter what decision we make." Melanie laughed, that warm laugh he was already completely addicted to hearing. "All right, then yes, I accept." And that was how Frank Cologne and Melanie Carter began their love story. And with them came a lesson worth keeping. No fortune in the world can replace the courage to be humble. Pride closes doors, but sincerity opens hearts. Whoever learns to put themselves in someone else's place, to serve without expecting applause, to persist without guarantees, discovers that love is not a prize for the richest or the most beautiful. It is a quiet reward for those who had the courage to change. And deep down, change is the greatest act of love there is.
Small steps on the frozen grass, frozen in a photograph. I looked up and the galaxy looked down. Gravity faded from the ground. The clock on the wall forgot to chime, as if we stepped outside of time. Your hand reached out to find my own, a map to a world I've never known. The distance between us began to fray, like shadows before the break of day. No words were needed in the dark, just the sudden glow of a hidden spark. Written in the constellations, 1,000 years of expectation. Every breath I've ever drawn, let me hear before the dawn. And in that moment, the universe stood still. The world surrendered to our will. The first touch, a sacred light, tearing through the velvet night. Pure as the snow, strong as the tide. With nowhere left for us to hide under the stars. Destiny spoke, and the silence finally broke. I used to wander without a trace, searching for a familiar face. But you were the anchor, you were the home, the end of the path I had to run. One heartbeat shared between two souls, finally making the broken whole. Let the years rush past our door. I don't need the future anymore, because a second is a monumental holy gift that heaven sent. It's you, it's always been you. And in that moment, the universe stood still. The world surrendered to our will. The first touch, a sacred light, tearing through the velvet night. Pure as the snow, strong as the tide. With nowhere left for us to hide under the stars. Destiny spoke, and the silence finally, everything changed. In the breath of a kiss, the stars are our witness. Destiny understood.
And you? Do you believe a millionaire would be capable of cleaning bathrooms to win someone over? And have you ever done something unusual, strange, or even a little ridiculous to win someone over? Tell us in the comments, and subscribe to the channel to see more stories like this.